It would have been good for me to have spent more time thinking about the importance of the idea invasive species. I heard the phrase here and there. I knew something about, oh, uh, somebody introduced some rat or onto some island and they upset everything. But I didn't think about invasive species much until I started having to take care of 6.5 acres of wooded mountain land on the western flank of Virginia's Shenandoah Valley. There's a lot going on uh, that if you want to have a decent landscape, you got to pay attention to. I would have, I wish I had paid more attention because I had a couple of big, wonderful oak trees. They were being climbed by wisteria. And I kind of assumed that this wisteria was the kind that people have on their southern verandas. And I'd always liked wisteria in that context. And I just wasn't very vigilant at the way that these things were growing and checking out, is this okay for the oak trees? By the time I understood that it wasn't okay for the oak trees, that these were a particularly aggressive, invasive form of wisteria, it was too late for the trees. So I had to deal with losing those trees and dealing with the expense and the work and anyway. But it got me thinking about invasive species more, and I realized that there's a lot of other places besides the wisteria. There are other invasives that are going on around here. Wild rose it grows in a very invasive way. It has the good side that it produces a great fragrance in the world for a little while. In June, I think it is. But you got to control it. And something called bishop's weed, too. Anyway, so I've thought about invasive species and discovered that where I live 100 and some years ago, it was a chestnut forest, a magnificent forest dominated by wonderful chestnut trees. There are no chestnut trees now. What happened was that somebody, not in Virginia, but in the eastern part of the United States, imported a Japanese chestnut. And this Japanese chestnut had sort of a ongoing, as well-established relationship with the fungus. And I gather that the tree and the fungus had evolved together for 27 million years. And so the Chinese chestnut that came over to the United States contained a fungal infection that wasn't a problem for the Chinese chestnut that had evolved with it. But when it escaped and started infecting the American chestnut, the chestnut simply got wiped out. Footnote, I gather that that sometimes chestnuts sort of spring up, but they only get so far before they get killed. And the other is that there's an active effort, one of science at its best kinds of things. I think that they have succeeded in now finally breeding an American chestnut that has the immunity of the Japanese chestnut. So that's what happened to the great American chestnut forest is indicative of two things. One, it's indicative of the dangers of invasive species, but more fundamentally, it shows that things that evolve together develop a synergistic relationship, or if they don't both benefit, if one benefits at the expense of the other, the damage to the one that's being exploited is it's still consistent with the survival of the host. Invasive species are species that did not evolve with the other elements in the ecosystem. And that is almost always a destructive thing, because of the nature. It tells you about the nature of evolution, that it creates synergistic relationships. It creates viabilities. And if you put things together that did not evolve together, then you're going to have trouble. Oftentimes, the human beings have been the agents of this spreading things. Like you hear about insects coming over from Asia, or some dangerous kind of mosquito that breeds in the water that accumulates in some tire, whatever. There are lots, and the zebra musclefish or something in the Great Lakes. There are a lot of destructive things that are the result of human beings moving things around. Not all the invasions have been that way. I mean, on South Sea Islands that were created by volcanoes. If nothing had invaded, I mean, they started off as lifeless volcanic rock, like Hawaii, and then things are dropped by birds or washed ashore, or over the considerable stretches of time, some life forms establish a foothold, and over time it develops into an ecosystem. But usually when we hear about invasive species, we're hearing about what human beings have brought from one side of the world to another. The gypsy moth was another invasive that we've had to deal with here. And we also have had to deal with a kind of ladybug that's virtually swarms in great numbers. And the stink bug is fairly famous now, and it's all over the mid-Atlantic or the Northeast or something. When you get something that doesn't fit in with a whole balance of relationships, like the lion and the zebra and the grass work together to create a perpetual motion machine, even as they devour each other. And that kind of balance is really at the key to the health of life on Earth. But one might also look at the whole of human civilization as a kind of invasive species. It's only been 10, 12,000 years that our species has been creating essentially a new life form. I describe how we have not been in very good control at all of how that life form, civilized society, has developed. But putting aside that, just the very fact that we've got new things emerging over thousands of years that did not evolve with the biosphere, but were created by a creature that has a creative intelligence to break out of the old rules and then essentially inadvertently plunge itself into a new situation where there aren't rules. The life form of civilized society, did not evolve with the rest of life on Earth in the way that other ecosystems, all the members of it, tend to be have evolved together over very long stretches of time. So we became the creatures when we civilized, changed the rules. We extricated ourselves from the natural order and found ourselves in a situation where there wasn't any order. And that's the situation that happens with an invasive species. So wherever civilization arose, there have tended to be problems about sustainability. It isn't always like wiping out the chestnut trees, but areas that were fertile and wooded and green became desert in the early stages of civilization, with the overgrazing of sheep, killing off the predators, continual irrigation of the land in an unsustainable way because the salt continues to build up. There's a book called Topsoil and Civilization. There's just a whole lot of ways that there was always signs that you could look at what was happening to life on Earth and you would say, there's a problem here. Civilized society is an invasive species. It is something that is progressing to permeate the system without having evolved with it. And now our invasive species has developed such great powers that it is super incumbent upon us to embrace the responsibility we have to fashion our relationship with the rest of life on Earth in a manner that sort of emulates what a non-invasive species would be like operating in these ecosystems and this biosphere with all the flows. It's got to be sustainable, or human civilization will essentially undermine the foundations of its existence. The sheep that overgrazed and wiped out the grass and allowed the Sahara to grow larger in northern Africa. They ate themselves out of house and home. Our big challenge is to make the changes we need to make for civilization, human civilization, to survive on this planet for the long haul. And one of them involves figuring out how not to be like an invasive species. Thank you.